Yes, yes, yes. What is up, General Strike Podcast family? Another weekly edition of the show, live on YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. I'm going to try to not rant so much during the show and try to keep my blood pressure low enough because a lot of topics that get me really upset, excuse me, on today's show, unfortunately, in terms of Joe Biden and his administration and the Democratic Party as a whole and how they operate in regards to foreign policy and domestic policy. I will obviously break down, because I like to break down, as I usually do on these shows, international news. I'm going to break down what's happening in Uganda. You have an update there that's greatly disappointing. It seems like one of those days where a lot of stuff came out, or I should say one of those weeks where a lot of news came out, and it was kind of all shitty. And it kind of a major reminder that, a reminder for most people out there, I think for a lot of us, we knew this, that it was business as usual with the American government, with the sort of neoliberal hegemonic order of the world. Regardless of if it was Trump or Biden, that was splitting hairs on the oligarchy, let's be quite honest. And I think most people knew that. Most people were quite aware of that. And yet, for some reason, we had to get reminded. Let's get into it. Obviously, I'm Matthew Hunter. Follow me below. Hit the like button, share the show, all that fun stuff, because it should be a rather intriguing episode. Let's talk about, obviously, Joe Biden and his entire failures as the president, and ones that we did know. I mean, most of us on the left knew that this was going to happen, that Joe Biden's foreign policy was no different than Donald Trump's. Why? Because the neoliberal, neoconservative foreign policy is one and the same. Okay? It always has been. The only difference between a neoliberal and neoconservative is one is far more religious when it comes to domestic policy. Things like abortion being a wedge issue. You're going to see that between a neoliberal and neoconservative. But foreign policy, when it comes to bombing countries in the global south to, one, send a message to your oppressed enemies, like Iran, and to also further gain access to oil reserves, is straight in the playbook of the neoliberal and neoconservative parties of America. There's no difference here. This isn't shocking. And we also have to think about some of the optics here. When you hear stories, I'm going to try to combine it with other stories here, about Joe Biden and them reconfiguring their military operations in Yemen. How it was portrayed was, we're pulling out of the Yemen genocide. In actuality, all it meant was some designations we're going to let go in terms of hostile engagements, and other ones we're going to continue to bomb. Okay? Same with Syria. Any sort of, or the Middle East as a whole, any sort of rhetorical device that tries to separate the Democrats from the Republicans is one that is null and void, because their material aim, their material history, what they have done is the same. There's no difference. Does one bomb a little bit more? Sure, but they both bomb brown and black people in the global south, regardless. And he did this all before raising the minimum wage, which seems to have been thrown under the bus, as comrade Eric Isaac says on social media. The Senate parliamentarian just killed $15 an hour. Her name is Elizabeth McDonough. She is not elected. She was appointed by the Senate Majority Leader. She can easily be replaced by Schumer with someone who will allow $15 hour for the minimum wage. Dems will use this as an excuse. They are lying. And if You're like, what the fuck is a Senate parliamentarian? And why haven't we heard about them before? It's because Democrats are using every procedural tool at their disposal to halt what little progress they've promised while trying to make it look like it's not their fault. And I want to remind people that the GOP removed the Senate parliamentarian in 2003. This is something that happened within most people's lifetime, that we've seen a parliamentarian object to the supermajority of whatever party is in control at the time, and they get removed from power. But the Democrats are going to act like this is a real holdup. And this is like another overall thing I'm going to get into is the lack of urgency by the Joe Biden administration and the feigned attempt at having their hands tied. Okay, they don't have their hands tied. They're actively, explicitly working to undermine the working class and undermine the American people as a whole, let alone abroad, right? I mean, Joe Biden yanked away stimulus checks from 17 million Americans. This happened yesterday. 17 million people that got stimulus checks last time aren't getting it this time. Why? Because of means testing that is outdated. Okay. Jeff Stein, I believe of the Washington Post, so that 12 million fewer adults and 5 million fewer children will receive benefits. And I think the money they're saving off of this is like a measly like $5 billion. It is something that is not an astronomical amount, especially when the overall stimulus is $1.9 trillion. You're talking about less than a percentage point. But we have to keep those PPE loans to Walmart and Target and Apple and Amazon. We have to keep giving them loans of billions of dollars. Why? I don't know, but we have to. It's just ridiculous at this point in time. Like I especially when like we get this type of report that came out. I think it came out today or is yesterday. I forget. No, it was yesterday. Late yesterday. In Stockton, they did this UBI experiment where 125 people got $500 per month for free for 2 years. I recommend reading this article if you want to check it out to start understand how it worked and all that stuff. But they saw I think it was a 15% increase in employment from this group of people. Saw improved health standards for these people. Overall, their lives were markedly improved by a measly $500 per month added to their income. Just give the people the money that they are owed. If wages had kept up with productivity from the 1970s, the minimum wage right now would be $23. $23. And we're arguing about 15. Okay? Like, it makes no sense. It's counterproductive. You know, and then as my computer freezes, hope you guys can hear me still. I'm back. No, I'm not back. I'm back now. There we go. Anyways, I recommend reading this article by David Dan, who I also recommend following. Good journalist. Someone I don't agree with all the time, but I like David Dan. I think he's a quality journalist out there. And he points out all of the executive orders Joe Biden could pass at this point in time. All of them. And he doesn't. They choose not to. The Democrats have the power to radically change the working class well-being, their health, standards of living, etc. They choose not to. Why? Because one, they're beholden to their donors, of course, their corporate donors. They're not really in it for the people, the working class. They're in it for the capitalist corporations, of course, that pay their election campaigns and eventually pay them cushy lobbyist jobs after they leave office or they don't get accepted for an administration position like Neera Tanden. Shout out to her. But the Democrats don't do that. Then we need to start being quite aware of the real enemy that we're facing is not Trump. It's not just the GOP or conservatives or white supremacists. It's not just them. They are part of it, of course. They're part of the enemy. But it is far more than just that. It's an entire capitalistic hegemonic system, an apparatus that needs to be dismantled, abolished, destroyed, along with state apparatuses that are clearly bourgeois states. Like, we need to just be honest about the actual fight. And this whole, like, bickering back and forth between Democrats and Republicans is stupid. Like, I'm so over defending Democrats. Like, even like the squad of the world, right, who explicitly say they're not socialists. Like, I'm done defending all of you. Like, I just don't. Like, when you in the squad or Bernie Sanders, when you back a policy that I support, awesome. We're on the same side. We're in a coalition with each other. But other times, no, I'm not. I don't have to be in coalition with you. The Democratic Party, like Kwame Ture said, is imperialist and capitalist to its core and racist to its core. You can't avoid that. The only real value electoralism has as a strategy is a way of organizing people. You organize people around mass events. That's about it. Where else are we at here? Let's talk about the George Floyd Police Act. I believe it's the full name of it. I forget what HR number it is. That got passed by the House. Excuse me. Today. It was passed by the House today. Obviously, no, it was yesterday. Obviously, rest in peace and rest in power to George Floyd still, of course. Condolences to his family. And it's greatly disappointing that the bill that's named in his honor is giving $750 million more to police to investigate themselves for their use of deadly force. Now, yes, does it technically ban chokeholds? Great, but New York has banned chokeholds for 30 years, and people are still getting choked to death by New York pigs. Okay, has it slightly adjusted qualified immunity? Yes, but we're still not changing the system. These are very small band-aids. Like, you guys know, I remember those like the circular band-aids. They're like super tiny. They're like for your fingers and shit, right? Like, they're super tiny ones. I imagine like this is like a 1,000 of those together on a giant leak in the Hoover Dam. That's what this is. Okay. We still have institutions that were started as racist, oppressive, exploitive institutions that are given and still largely have the right to use deadly force against the people, regardless of threat, guilt, whatever it may be. Until those racist institutions, ones that would round up escaping slaves and brutalize them and kill them, those institutions, which are now our modern pig departments, they need to be stripped and abolished of everything they have. And all of those resources need to be given back to the community. Okay, all that armament, go back to the fucking community. Let the community arm their own militias. They do it better than you do. But again, back to neoliberalism. I mean, this is just the same old shit. You know, it's not, the Democratic Party is not, or the Republican Party, of course, is not at all of the mindset of changing systemic racism. They're the mindset that they need to appear like they're fighting systemic racism. That's all they want. Let's be quite honest. As I mentioned earlier, Neera Tanden, who was supposed to be Biden's budget chief, withdraws from her nomination as she's received massive pushback and backlash, of course, from seemingly everyone except for staunch establishment Democrats and, weirdly enough, Bernie Sanders. I don't know why, especially when she attacked him so viciously and the movement that he helped push on. But I'm happy that this warmonger, this abuser supporter nominee is no longer the nominee. She had really no qualifications for it, first off. And secondly, her record was abysmal. It was a poor man's Hillary Clinton. Like, that's just the reality. Her policy goals around Libya were directly from the Hillary Clinton playbook, and they were just like even poorer. Like, they were more poorly oriented, surprisingly. Not a big surprise. And also not really going to change much. I mean, who we're going to get next instead of her? Going to be more qualified maybe, but still have connects to like Goldman Sachs or something like that. Let's be quite honest about it. Moving away from domestic policy for a second, I want to update you guys on what's happening with Haiti. We're going to play some clips from Danny Shaw, professor at the, is it at CUNY? Yeah. And he's been on Telesur, RT, Press TV. He's been around. Good person to follow for Latin American news, to be quite honest. Very intelligent person. And like a very intelligent person that doesn't like browbeat you with intelligence. That's always nice. Let's play this clip of him marching in Haiti and sort of explaining what is happening there as he's marching. Hold on, let me get the sound just right. And put it back up on the screen, of course.
Another mass demonstration, weeks and weeks of mass demonstrations in Haiti with a clear message that Jovenel Moïse does not have a constitutional mandate. Main roadblock to Haitian progress, to the Haitian people being able to breathe and live free and have true self-determination, historically has been the U.S., the United Nations, the Organization of American States. How many times have they occupied, invaded Haiti? This mass movement, which continues to take the streets of Port-au-Prince, au Cap, it's important that we give it international press coverage. If this was Hong Kong or Taiwan, according to one demonstrator, we would see international cameras everywhere. But because it's Haiti, and they've tried to instill neocolonialism on Haiti, we see an incredible double standard. Hopefully we can continue to give a platform to the Haitian revolutionary leadership to get their voices out to the world.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, Haiti's been, unfortunately, a victim of U.S. imperialism and aggression for a very long time, has been an unfortunate case study in some fashion when it comes to neocolonialism, while having this really rich revolutionary history, of course. Haiti's always fascinated me, to be quite honest. There was a interview he did with Max Blumenthal. I'm not the biggest fan of Max Blumenthal, to be quite honest. But I recommend checking out the interview. It's on Blumenthal's YouTube channel, The Moderate Rebels, I believe is the name of the YouTube channel. I recommend checking out the full interview because it is just an interesting interview, and Danny Shaw is just a good talker as well. But I'm going to play a clip that they posted on social media about it, or of the interview.
Running through the...
And again, a little bit of an explanation of what's happening there, and some context, of course. Let me pull it up. Hold on. Excuse me. Here we go.
Running through the streets of Cité Soleil, mowing people down, cutting them up to repress what's left of that resistance movement. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, we can stay up all night talking about this. I mean, Haiti's synthesized Haiti's revolutionary potential, that 1804 legacy, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the Malcolm X of Haiti, Toussaint Louverture, the Martin Luther King, if you will, an oversimplification. Haiti's revolutionary potential, all of the world, all oppressed people have an incredible historical debt to Haiti. But every time Haiti's tried to rise up, 1991, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, the people's priest, TTT, the Church of the Poor, 2004, same thing. They overthrow Aristide. All of a sudden, the U.S. Embassy intervenes. U.S. boots on the ground, United Nations as a fig leaf for U.S. occupation. So I think the first thing we have to do to be in solidarity with the Haitian people is to review history and to understand what's happening. Haiti does not need missionaries. Shout out to all my Mormon peeps, but Haiti does not need Mormons. They need reparations. They need justice. So I think Haiti is that perfect example of solidarity, not charity. I read a statistic at some point, probably you or Ben wrote it, something about, Haiti had one of the highest proportions of NGOs and nonprofits to their population. And what does that bring? That brings more misery. Basically, Malcolm X has that quote, more dependency. Malcolm X has that quote, we don't want your crumbs, we want a bakery in which to make our own bread.
Right. And we saw what the Clinton Foundation did down there. We saw what Wyclef did there. It was just, it's basically using the country as a tableau of suffering in order to extract donations from the imperial core and just run a racket. And it feels like a really good example to present to these people who you were talking about before within the left, or what passes for the left in the US, who get on board with.
Yeah, I again recommend checking out the full interview. It's interesting. It's about an hour long. If you want, you can find it. It's right there too. If you find this video and stuff, go to my Twitter account. Obviously, I retweet all these videos and articles and stuff like that. Anyways, let's move on to the next topic because, hold on. I have one clip I want to play. I thought this was a cool clip I saw. It was a Jean-Jacques Dessalines impersonator in Haiti during one of the protests. I thought it was pretty cool. Like, I'll be honest. Get up here. Love all the Ancon colors. Madame Buchmann and Danny Shaw are good people to follow when it comes to what's happening on the ground in Haiti in real time. Highly recommend following those people if you want real-time updates. Moving on, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, have opened investigations into Israeli war crimes in Palestine. It's been long overdue to for their National Criminal Court to investigate what we have been seeing on media sites for years now, if not decades now, which is extreme oppression and human rights violations conducted upon the Palestinian people, who are clearly subject to an imperialist nation at the very least, if not a colonial and apartheid state in Israel. Right? These are just realities right now. And when Nelson Mandela says we are not free until the Palestinians are free, that's a direct call that the Palestinians are victims of an apartheid state. And we add the increase in consistent sort of erosion of Palestinian land for decades and decades. It's clear what's been happening here. And hopefully there is some justice for the Palestinian people for the suffering that they have conducted. Okay. I treat Israel like any other state, to be quite honest. I just look how it affects the working class. Is there a caste system within those nations? Is there a class system within these nations? Like, those are questions I ask. I could care less about the religion. Could care less. Like Modi in India, the issues there aren't because he is a Hindu. The issues are because he reinforces a class and caste system within that nation. Okay? That is why. Similar, Netanyahu, give two shits that he's Jewish. I care about, does he reinforce a class system within his country? Does he reinforce capitalism within his country? Does he oppress other ethnic groups to subject them to harsher labor conditions, to exploit them for more profit? And these things are all true. And we have to criticize the Israeli state for the exploitation and oppression that they have conducted on the Palestinian people. We have to. But of course, the U.S. government's not going to, because Tony Blinken, aka the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, right? Saying the United States firmly opposes an international criminal court investigation into the Palestinian situation. I also love how, like, situation's capitalized. You know, like, it's weird to me. That's just odd phraseology there. We will continue to uphold our strong commitment to Israel and its security, including by opposing actions that seek to target Israel unfairly. Oh, man. The U.S. is just overtly saying, yes, we support war criminals. You know why? Because we commit more war crimes than any other nation in the last 60, 70 years, probably, give or take. Oh, well. Oh, well. Speaking of Tony Blinken, he has some more great lines coming out. He had like a whole barrage of topics. 3 years ago, this is what he's saying. 3 years ago, today, Russia poisoned Sergei Skripal and his daughter with a chemical weapon on British soil. We reaffirm our commitment to justice for all victims of Russia's repeated use of chemical weapons, including Alexi Navalny. Russia's actions have consequences. He also said, today the U.S. imposed sanctions on Russia for attempting to assassinate Alexei Navalny with a Novichok nerve agent. Any use of chemical weapons is unacceptable. We stand with our EU and UK partners to counter Russia's actions and calling for Mr. Navalny's release. Remind people, the U.S. has funded biological weapons for decades, not only domestically, but abroad. We literally gave Saddam fucking Hussein his chemical weapons to use against Iran in the 80s. And then turn around when we wanted a ROI on what we gave to Saddam Hussein, and then invaded him. Okay? Has Anthony Blinken talked at all about Haiti and defending the people there? No. Okay. As death squads roam Port-au-Prince, what is the U.S. government doing? Still supporting the illegal president of Haiti. Why? Because we put him there in the first place. So this whole, like, grandstanding on morality by the U.S. government, it's just such bullshit. It clearly is. Do you restructure the government or say the economy enough to allow U.S. corporations and multinational corporations to exploit your labor and resources? If so, we will support you. That's what the U.S. government thinks. That is the bottom line. If you do that, we support you. Speaking of support, it's still Anthony Blinken topics. Today, Venezuelan interim president Juan Guaido and I discussed our unwavering support for democracy in Venezuela and our efforts to improve the lives of the Venezuelan people. First off, Jack, he's not the interim president. He was never elected as the president. He is not even in the parliament of Venezuela anymore. He's not an elected official anymore. Also, Maduro was the elected president of Venezuela. That is the democratic choice, not your hand-picked State Department puppet. Okay? And at the same time, you talk about we want to improve the lives of Venezuelan people, yet they have increased sanctions on the Venezuelan people that have led to thousands of people dying. So the idea of that Anthony Blinken can get on his fucking pedestal and say that we want to protect Venezuela democracy and protect and the well-being of the people there, while supporting policy that kills Venezuelan people and working to undermine their democratic institutions. Why? For access to the labor and resources of that country. That is why. That is why the U.S. has supported nearly a 20-year-long coup attempt against Venezuela. Okay, that's why they have at numerous times applied sanctions to hurt the Venezuelan people. Solidarity with the Venezuelan people and Nicolas Maduro and all of the working class there. Ridiculous. Brief update on Myanmar as it's seemingly getting more violent and repressive. Curious to see where this heads, of course, and how the U.S. responds. I do know that the U.S. supported Hong Kong protesters, who have great issues with, of course, for a variety of reasons. They have been supportive of the protest movements within Myanmar, and that's red flags for me. This is a potential for the people to really rise up and challenge not only the military dictatorship, but also the failures of the neoliberal order that preceded it, that led to a genocide within the country against the Muslim population there. So there are real concerns about co-opting of this movement within Myanmar. Very concerned about that. As I'm concerned about any co-option of radical revolutionary movements. That's always a concern. It should always be a concern, especially with the power that the U.S. government has shown to co-opt radical revolutionary movements. It cannot be denied. Moving on. Okay, hold on one second here. As I try to clean up all these tabs. And then we get to the fun half of the show, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, we're going to play clips, make fun of people. Glenn Greenwald, you have some PragerU videos with Dinesh D'Souza. Yay. What else? Obviously, your Richard Wolff economic update we're going to watch, as is customary for our show, I feel like, at this point in time. And some other stuff. It's March 4th. Did the epic revolt happen in Washington, D.C.? Did Donald Trump get sworn in? We're going to cover that, break that down, of course. As I still clean up all these fucking tabs, guys. So many topics to get into. And I actually had to cut quite a bit off. I should really do this show truly every week, but I always like doing these long ass shows. It's always fun. As I'm getting to the gist of it. Remember, guys, hit the like button, share the show, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Patreon.com/Trending Now Network and Cash App, Trending Now Network, if you want to support the show in any financial way. Of course, we don't have to. All content is free. So simply just like or share the show. That's free ways to support it. Okay, let's watch it from good friend of the show, even though he's not really a friend of the show. He doesn't know me. Donnie O'Sullivan at CNN. I want to say I vaguely know his family because I think it was cousin or brother works in MMA, right? But anyways, let's get to Donnie O'Sullivan breaking down what's happening with the new Trump inauguration today, which was supposed to happen, right? We were told that by QAnon.
Months tracking all of this. What is the online chatter right now about this alleged March 4th plot?
Hey, John, a lot of QAnon followers are already moving on. Look, many of them were convinced that Biden was not going to be inaugurated. They were hoping and believed that martial law would be declared on the day of the inauguration. Of course, that did not happen. And then many of them quickly moved on to this March 4th date, which is, of course, today. And they believed that Trump was going to be inaugurated today. Why? Well, because a lot of presidents were inaugurated in the 19th century on March 4th. And this is a belief that's been coast to coast. I want you to take a listen to this Trump supporter and QAnon believer who I spoke to in California last week.
It is my hope that President Trump comes back as the 19th president of the United States under the
It's so crazy.
And that he is inaugurated on March 4th. That is my hope for our future.
Are you going to feel foolish on March 5th when Biden's still president?
That Trump has a different plan.
And John, obviously that's crazy. But what we've seen is these crazy conspiracy theories, they can have meaningful impact. They can lead to violence. Obviously, we saw today that it has contributed to the heightened security presence here in Washington, D.C. And as crazy as those conspiracy theories are, John, it all still comes back to the big lie, because the big lie that's being perpetrated by former President Trump, that the election was in some way stolen, it's that conspiracy that is enabling the rest of the crazy. John?
Without a doubt, when you hear that woman say, then Trump has another plan. If Biden's inaugurated on the 20th, if it doesn't happen today, then Trump has another plan. That tells you how important it is that he choose his words carefully, and the people who support him choose their words carefully, because some of them think this is funny. It's not funny.
It's not funny. It's
Absolutely.
not.
And I mean, it's terrifying, frankly. Look, as you mentioned, we've traveled the country speaking to many conspiracy theorists. There's not a lot that shocks us anymore. But at that same event, I was speaking to people who were praising what is happening in Myanmar, the military coup. They want to see it happen here. Again, they're obsessed with the idea the military's on their side. They want the military to come in and put Trump back in office. It's a very scary scenario that we're hearing.
Tony, grateful for your reporting, not just today, but over these past months. You have such a great understanding of all this. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. And with me here in studio to share her report.
Oh, by the way, new report from Reuters. Exclusive, U.S. blocked Myanmar military dictatorship attempt to empty $1 billion in the New York Fed account. Interesting. Don't have much on that, obviously. Just saw a headline on Twitter. Okay, let's keep going on to the good stuff here, man. The good stuff. Glenn fucking Greenwald. Just mask off, man. Like, holy shit. Like, I can't believe he said what he said here. He considers Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, and Donald Trump of 2016 iteration, to be exact, to be socialists. I want to read the quote, and then there's a small clip we can play too, but I think the clip is just going to be me reiterating. Where is it? Obviously, the term socialism carries a lot of baggage from the Cold War. It evokes on purpose the Soviet Union or Castro or Chavez. Greenwald continued, but I think what you were seeing is this kind of hybrid socialism. What could this be? That really is about nothing more than trying to sandpaper the edges off of neoliberalism. No, if he combined this with like a strong take, and this wasn't on the Daily Caller, right? If this was on like some leftist outlet, and then he was like, yeah, and this is why like social democracy is a bullshit theory, I'd be like, yes, based Glenn Greenwald. But that's not what he said. He said, he went on to say that he, quote, would describe a lot of people on the right as being socialists, such as former White House strategist Steve Bannon and the 2016 iteration of former President Donald Trump as a candidate based on what he was saying. I consider Tucker Carlson to be a socialist, Greenwald said of the Daily Caller co-founder. Is he fishing for a job here? I don't know. He then described an instance where Carlson and Democratic New York Rep. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is self-identified socialist, which she's not. She's not. Agreed in their mutual opposition to Democratic New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who's facing some massive allegations for sexual assault, by the way. Just wanted to mention that. Forgot to put that in the topics. Apologies. But yeah, fuck Andrew Cuomo. Always been that case. Always will be. Andrew Cuomo wanting to give tens of millions of dollars to Amazon to bring an office to New York. He attributed the agreement to people realizing that neoliberalism doesn't work. I think the vision is, you have this kind of right-wing populism, which really is socialism. God damn it. It's so bad. It is so bad. How? First off, right-wing populism is like an oxymoron. Like it's a thing people say, but it's not a real thing. I've always been of that mindset that right-wing populism is a rhetorical game by the right, but it's not substantive in any reality, while left-wing populism is actual populism because you're wanting to apply policies and institutions to support the working class. That's why it's truly populism. Right-wing populism is just saying, like, immigrants are bad, we'll give you jobs back, while still allowing like corporations like Walmart and Amazon and Ford or whoever to offset production to the third world. Like that's what it is still. Anyways, so it's not socialism. Socialism is the workers or the proletariats under a dictatorship of the proletariats control the means of production. Like that's really all you can say. It's either the proletariat as a whole, or it's a dictatorship of the proletariat and control of the means of production, not individual capitalists. And right-wing populism 100% supports capitalism. So it's just not socialism. They're antithetical, actually. And he seems to be overall confusing populism with socialism, which is not the same thing. Back to Greenwald's quote here, which really is socialism. That says we should close our borders. Let me start the topic. I think the vision is, you have this kind of right-wing populism, which really is socialism, that says we should close our borders, not allow unconstrained immigration, and then take better care of our working class people and not allow this kind of transnational, global, corporatist elite to take everything for themselves under the guise of neoliberalism. First off, there's nothing about closing borders or just borders, period, that is socialist in any fashion. Like, if there's one like truism, so to speak, that the right says about the left, is that we are for open borders. Like, yeah, we don't believe in fucking nation states. Like, that's not a concept in our mind. We understand that the need and necessity for socialist states, and sort of a revolutionary, indigenous, native nationalism that's important in combating hegemonic control of the empire at the time. But that's very different than saying that we're for closing borders. It's not socialism. It just isn't. And also, like, shaving, like, or what was the phrase he used here? Where did he say it? He was like, fuck. My bad, guys. I'm trying to find where he said this. Here we go. Sandpaper the edges off of neoliberalism. That's not socialism. Like, that is a baseline shit that you need to do if you're a politician, is to try to fix neoliberalism and the failures of it. But this is not socialism at all. I just don't know. It's so sad, man. And it also just kind of shows that, like, he was just lucky and he was just given the information by Snowden, and that's what made him big to some degree. Right man at the right time, both for that and maybe for Brazil and his stories there. Because clearly the guy has a very rudimentary understanding of these concepts, or understands them and is purposely playing stupid here for a conservative audience in the hopes of appeasing his conservative fan base now, which to me just would be far more malicious. Like, if he was just stupid, like, hey man, like, there's tons of stupid people out there, though he should not be stupid in this case because of who he's been around, who he's interviewed, and the like. It's almost impossible for him to misunderstand these terms to this degree with the work he has conducted. So that leads me to kind of leaning that this is a purposeful attempt to play dumb to a conservative audience. And it's extremely sad. Extremely sad. Play a clip from that, though. I think it's just him basically saying what I read in the quote. But if you want to hear his words exactly, here we go.
Liberalism. And I, would describe a lot of people on the right as being socialists. I would consider Steve Bannon to be a socialist. I would consider the 2016 iteration of Donald Trump, the candidate, to be a socialist based on what he was saying. I consider Tucker Carlson to be a socialist. Now if you have liberalism, and I, would describe a lot.
What is that? And the weird, like, delineation between 2016 campaign Trump and, like, his actual presidency is just stupid. Like, that's the only word I can use for it. It's fucking stupid. So depressing, man. Speaking of kind of depressing, there's going to be a Marcus Garvey movie coming out. And it's from the point of view of the informant again. I kind of wavered on Judas and the Black Messiah on whether or not it was counter-revolutionary because of the angle and framing of the movie. And I kind of just chalked up to, like, they're trying to make a real drama about it. And even though they didn't really need to do that, and they wanted to make it into, like, this cop or, like, mafia movie, and I guess they had to have the perspective of the pigs, I guess. But now it seems like a concerted effort by Hollywood to undermine Black revolutionaries by purposely trying to sow division in the Black community. Like, how else can you put it? Like, you're portraying these Black revolutionaries as being, one, not the protagonists of the story. They're kind of like the subject of the protagonist, like what the protagonist is talking about and focus on, but they're not the protagonist. And on top of it, you're showing these revolutionary movements in a light that, like, think about this. Think about how Hollywood portrayed or does portray the American Revolution. Think about, like, Patriot or movies like that, right? And then compare how they view black revolutionaries. It's drastically different. The framing of it, the motive of it, and it does seem like, again, like a concerted effort. Sad, because, I mean, Winston Duke would be awesome. I think, as Marcus Garvey, like, I think it's good casting. Marcus Garvey is a fascinating individual that would obviously work in a movie, but it's not going to be the focus of the movie. Again, can't help but feel like that's on purpose. Let's watch the economic update from Richard Wolff and get educated, get some knowledge up in here. Because, you know, I'm also an idiot, so it's always better to have, like, you know, these people come on and explain things and educate me and us.
Welcome, friends, to another edition of Economic Update, a weekly program devoted to the economic dimensions of our lives, jobs, debts, incomes, our own, and those of our children. I'm your host, Richard Wolff. I want to begin today with a theme for the program as a whole. And the theme might be called either the problems of capitalism normally, or the problems of capitalism when it's in a period of decline. I'll try to move back and forth between them because I want to focus on capitalism's problems, because those are what confront us here and now. So it's appropriate that I begin with the Amazon Corporation, a supposedly success story of current days of capitalism. And I want to focus on some of the things you may not have heard about or know about this particular corporation. So I won't be talking about the fact that its CEO, or now I should say former CEO, Jeff Bezos, is now the second richest person on the planet after Elon Musk from Tesla outdid him over the last couple of weeks, but that'll bounce up and down. Somewhere between 180 and $200 billion, way more money than, for example, would take care of the entire rental arrears of 20 million Americans who are facing eviction. I'll put all that aside. I want to go back to the year 2015. Amazon at that point started what was called the Flex program for drivers. It needed to get people to come and work at Amazon to deliver the packages that it is famous for. And they promised these workers to pay them $18 to $25 an hour plus, and this is the important part, 100% of tips that were to be provided for delivery of packages, as many people do. However, it turns out that for several years after 2015, Amazon actually took the tips and used it to pay the basic rate so that the workers never got the tips that were left by you and me for them. The United States government prosecuted Amazon. Amazon got caught. And let's always remember that what you catch if you're the government going after corporations is a small part of what's going on. Anyway, they had to pay and agreed to pay $61 million. That was the portion of what they had done that got caught to compensate the workers for the tip money taken from them. You're a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and here's the lesson. The enormous wealth of Jeffrey Bezos and of people like him, the enormous wealth of these corporations, is based on endless examples of this kind of either illegal or quasi-legal nickel and dime. That's what this is about. And this system reproduces that behavior over and over again. On January 25th of the year 2021, hundreds of workers at an Amazon warehouse in Chicago were presented with a choice. You can sign up for a 10.5-hour graveyard shift, or you lose your job. Management informed the workers that their warehouse, known as DCH1, would be shut down, and they were offered a shift called the Megacycle at a new Chicago warehouse. This had been a warehouse area that had been hit by protests and strikes. Yeah, that's how you get treated if you dare to protest stealing tips and other stunning behavior. No wonder that in Canada there's now a website called Not Amazon, which allows you to get things delivered from local vendors without going through the controls and fees that Amazon charges. And that is developing here in the United States as well. Profits for the few at the expense of the many. No wonder there are unionizing drives. And the one in Bessemer, Alabama is in full gear as we are talking now, and is a work site for almost 6,000 workers. In the history of Alabama, this is a very important moment in terms of unionization. But if ever a corporation, by its behavior just now, explains why you need a union, well, Amazon is it. My next update deals with New York State, but what it deals with is a problem that exists across the United States, but we have some solid statistics in New York State, so I want to make that as an example. In New York State, there are 1.2 million families, so we're talking a minimum of 5 to 10 million people in those families, who are now facing what are called rent arrears. What that means is they haven't paid their rent, some of them for a month or two, some of them for 10 months. Many of these families are with children. So now let's look a little deeper into these numbers. 12.5% of New Yorkers are collecting unemployment insurance, 1 in 8 workers. And there's a big overlap between those who can't get a regular salary, who are having to live on unemployment, and therefore cannot cover their rent. You'll understand that even more when I tell you that in 2018, so that's a good 2 years before the pandemic hits, already then, 22% of New Yorkers, more than 1 in 5, paid more than half their income in rent. That's considered to be deep trouble. You can't live in our society if you're paying more than half of your income simply for your living situation. But that was true for almost 1 in 4 New Yorkers before the unemployment hit, before the pandemic hit. Before the pandemic, one more statistic for you, actually 2. Before the pandemic, families with children made up 70% of the population of shelters in New York State. That's right. Families with children are the typical shelter occupant already before the pandemic and the unemployment hit. Children upon whom you really cannot blame 1 millimeter of what's happening to them. And then think about the consequences of doing this to all those children. And I'm going to give you my last statistic. In 2016, a survey showed that 85% of children living in shelters achieved proficiency scores in, 85% of kids didn't get proficiency in math and reading. That's the damage done to their educations from being shelter occupants, which so many of them are. New York State is one of the richest states in the United States, which is one of the richest countries in the world. And we are treating our people, especially our children, in a way that illustrates that capitalism is at least as efficient in producing poverty and reproducing it as it is in producing wealth and reproducing thereby a level of inequality that calls the entire system into question. If we were serious as a society about doing something for this kind of inequality, condemning this generation, as we have as a nation for so many previous generations, to these levels of discrimination and inequality, the children who made none of these decisions, losing their education, living in the worst conditions, suffering all of the large and small indignities that go with it, we are reproducing horrific inequality. And if that continues, then I make you a prediction, which I rarely do. We're going to have as angry and upset a population 4 years from now that we've had over the last 4, probably worse. And the way we'll have been prepared for the next Trump to blame it all on whoever they can come up with.
Democrats.
I'm sure QAnon will have an answer for why all this trouble is happening. But the bitterness, the anger, and the resentment, well, that's building because you're not dealing with this. I make an appeal to the new Biden administration. Deal with the fundamental systemic reproduction of inequality, or else it will come back to haunt you. My next update, and I will begin this before our mid-program break and then come back to it, has to do with a way of raising money. Again, I'm going to be using New York State because it's a wonderful example, but parallel things apply to other states. New York State has a thing in its tax code called a stock transfer tax. Think of this as a sales tax if you buy and sell stocks. You know how we all pay a tax if we go to the hairdresser or we buy a shirt or we pick up an appliance. There's a sales tax when you buy goods and services like that. And so back in 1905, a long time ago, it occurred to fair-minded people that there ought to be a sales tax when you buy shares of stock. Okay, so the idea was, let's do that. Very low pennies, few pennies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cents per share when you buy it. It's a sales tax. And it was thought to be fair because this is a big, rich playground, the stock market, for an awful lot of people who certainly can afford it. That if it's reasonable to tax the expenditure of people who buy food for their family, well, then it's reasonable to tax people who buy shares and have enough money even to think about doing that. And then finally, there was the idea there's too much speculation anyway. We should be taxing people who are buying and selling 10 times a day. You know, that kind of speculative activity is a reasonable thing. You know, same kind of logic that says, let's tax cigarettes or let's tax alcohol because we'd like to kind of push back against overuse of those things. Well, you want to push back against speculation, then tax the speculator, make them pay a little. It was perfectly logical. And the tax was collected here in New York State until 1981, when the then mayor of New York came up with a wonderful idea to get support from rich people. He said, we'll collect the tax because he didn't have the courage to cancel it, but we'll rebate it. So actually, to this day, New York State collects a very small stock transfer tax, but then gives it back to the people who buy. It's as if you paid a sales tax, and then at the end of the year, you got all that money back. That's what we do. We don't tax stocks. It's an amazing thing. And I'll come back and talk about what it means after our break. We've come to the end of the first part of today's show. Before we get to the second half, I want to remind you, our new book, The Sickness is the System When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, is available at democracy.info/books. And I want to thank, as always, our Patreon community for their ongoing and invaluable support. If you haven't already done so, please go to patreon.com/economic update to learn more about how you can get involved. Please stay with us. We'll be right back to continue this story. Welcome back, friends, to the second half of today's economic update. We were discussing before the break the stock transfer tax, a sales tax, if you like, on buying shares of stock in the stock market that's been on the books in New York State since 1905, when it struck people to be a fair way to make that part of the economy pay its fair share of the cost of running the government. Then in 1981, to pander to the wealthy who play the stock market, since most of the rest of us don't, they rebated it. That's what they called it. They continued to raise it, to tax people, because they didn't have the courage to say, well, no tax. And what they have been doing, and they do to this day, is they rebate it. They give people back the money officially charged as a tax on buying shares of stock. And now I want to talk with you about the justification and what it means of this craziness of collecting and then not keeping the money. And let me underscore, we're talking about billions of dollars a year. It would transform the state of New York's financial situation, even if you put only a penny or 2 or 5 per share, which is a trivial amount of money when you think about what's done. And to give you a sense of it, imagine if we had imposed it over the last couple of months with the craziness in the GameStop scandal, you know, the crazy shooting up of prices of that company, and then the crazy drop. Well, millions and millions and millions of shares were bought and sold by speculators trying to make a killing off the price going up or the price going down. But those are all transactions. And had they had to pay a sales tax, even a small one, the revenue take for the state of New York would have gone a long way to offset the rest of that horrible speculation and made a silver lining, if you like, in terms of providing the people of New York with some benefit. And of course, if you didn't have a stock transfer tax in New York, you could have it nationally. And let me start with that. One of the arguments made by corporations in the stock field on Wall Street is you can't do that. If you did that, we would move the transfer of stock, the buying and selling, out of New York State. We'd go across to New Jersey or somewhere else. Well, first of all, that's not so easy. That involves expenses that have to be undertaken to do such a move technologically and so on. Not so easy. And it will require legislation, etc. So it's a bit of a fake, number one. Number two, it's a risky fake, because how do you know that New Jersey, once you've spent the money and moved it over there, won't do the same thing, especially when New York State is showing them what's going on here, which we would do. Or then let me generalize it. Maybe a progressive legislator, AOC, for example, from New York, could make this a national issue, that there should be a sales tax, a national one, on this. After all, in our society, we don't tax property in the form of stocks and bonds. I've talked about this on our program before. We tax income that comes from them, like we tax the income that comes from a home that we rent out to people. We have to pay an income tax on the rent. but we also have to pay a property tax on the value of the house. But it doesn't work like that with stocks. You pay an income tax on the dividends you get, but nobody makes you pay a property tax on the value of your stocks and bonds. That's why it's so strange. If you sell your $100,000 house and you buy $100,000 worth of stock, you have to pay property tax in your town for the house. But once you've sold it for the stock, you don't pay property tax to anybody. This is a benefit that rich people who have enough money to have a significant amount of stocks have been benefiting from for decades. Long overdue to give them, for example, a stock transfer tax from which they've also been exempted. It's the outrageous indignity. And then there's the last argument. You can't do that because companies or stock markets will leave the United States. I love this argument. They'll leave the United States. Will they? They might. But the notion that we are powerless to prevent that or to punish it, if some would like to do it, is wrong. Of course we can. Imagine a stock market that left the United States with a president and a government that said, excuse me, you're staying and you're paying the tax. But if you wish to avoid the tax that you should have been paying for a century anyway, by running away, fine. We will then not do business with you. You will not be able to come to our country to make the kind of money you need to make any stock market in the world work. We will do it by jawboning from the president. We will do it by organizing boycotts. You are not going to punish the future in the way you have evaded taxes in the past. That system is over. Imagine a president or a political party or a movement making a commitment to do that, saying that the people have the power to make taxes paid by those who should never have been exempted from them. And the stock game players on Wall Street are a prime appropriate target. They have ripped off the rest of this society for long enough. There is no reason to enable or allow them to do it. And nothing exemplifies this better than the craziness of New York State having in effect a stock transfer tax, a sales tax on shares in the law since 1905 that is rebated since 1981 so that the richest amongst us don't have to pay. Extraordinary. But it is the kind of extraordinary bias built into the tax structure of this society. And you can tell by who benefits from this odd tax structure, who has the power to shape that structure so it works that way. My next update is another example of where arguments are used that simply don't hold water. And it's very important, and it's being debated in Washington right now. This has to do with raising the minimum wage. Yeah, we have to come back to that topic again because it's hot in this country again. Current federal minimum wage, $7.25 an hour, among the very lowest in the world. And by that, I mean the industrial societies that are comparable to the United States. No European country pays that little as a minimum wage, whether it's legally in force or just customary. It's extraordinary. I'll give you one example of a country that in other ways is economically like ours, the United Kingdom. The minimum wage in the United Kingdom right now, as I'm speaking to you, is $11.95 an hour, not $7.25 an hour. You get it? It's not even close in terms of what we are doing. Okay, we should be raising it as prices go up, because if you don't, then you give workers the same minimum wage as the prices go up. They can't afford what they were able to buy last year, this year, and they'll be able to afford even less next year. Well, the last time we raised the minimum wage to the big $7.25 an hour was in 2009. Folks, that's 12 years ago. Every one of those years, prices went up in America for everything you have to buy, but the minimum wage didn't. That's hurting the poorest amongst us every year. Democratic Party proposes to raise it. Republican Party opposes it. And here comes the argument, which sadly the Democratic Party doesn't know how to refute. Here's the argument. Ready? If you raise the minimum wage, there'll be some employers, typically small businesses, who will go out of business or fire workers because they can't afford to pay the extra bucks. For example, moving the minimum wage to $15 an hour, which is what's on the agenda now from the Biden administration, thanks to the pressure of unions and social movements over the last few years. Now let's look at this analysis because it is cold stone wrong. Do we want a society in which there are small businesses that are successful? I happen to believe that the answer is yes. I like shopping with little businesses where I can get to know the people I believe in that. I like that. I want that. And I think most Americans do as well. Side by side, I want workers to be paid a wage that allows them to have a decent life for themselves, for their children. And that includes having an automobile in our culture, which builds on that, having an education for those children, and so on. Guess what? I want a decent minimum wage, and I want small business. So you know how you get that? You don't get it by saying, well, it's either or. Either we're going to help the low-wage workers by raising the minimum, or we're going to salvage small businesses. That's like running up to someone and say, I'm giving you a choice. I'm either going to shoot you or stab you. Your response isn't to agonize over which of them to choose. Your response is to say, I don't accept that as a choice I'm to make. And that's the answer to the minimum wage. We can have small businesses that are viable, and we can enable them to pay a decent minimum wage, because a decent society would do both those things. Now, how would we do it? Here's your answer. Number one, and by the way, I'm just borrowing from other countries that have done a much better job, like those other ones that pay a higher minimum wage. Here's the first. Require that all levels of government, federal, state, and local, give a minimum percentage of their orders to small businesses, that we do not allow the patronage of large businesses who have the money to, let's be polite, persuade, or if you're not polite, bribe politicians as to where they do their buying. Let's make small businesses get a bit of that. And let's give them a tax break, and let's give them subsidies. And you know why we should do that to small businesses? Two reasons. One, so they can pay minimum wage. It's a way of saying to the small business, here, you're going to have to pay workers decently, but we're going to offset the cost to you from that by giving you this tax break, this subsidy, this set of orders for your output. And you know why? The second reason is to do that, because we already do that as a society for big business. So we're just saying, hey, big business, you're not going to steal all that for yourself. We're going to maintain something we really want, small businesses, and you're going to help pay for it. And just to give you an example, I picked one out of the hat. There are millions of them. Here's the statistic, which I thought would be appropriate because here we are right after the Super Bowl. Okay? In the economics of today's major sport franchise, 64 billionaires are owners of major sports franchises. 28 sports teams are owned by billionaires who got $9 billion in public subsidies for the stadiums they use. That's right. You and I, our taxes help pay for those stadiums. That's a subsidy. That's why they can pay higher wages, because we don't do that for small businesses. half as much as we could. And if we did it better, they could pay minimum wages, and we'd have both an appropriately paid working class and the kind of small businesses we want. Don't be fooled. Those are not either ors, and it's only big business that pays politicians to pretend that that's the issue. Thank you for being with me today. I hope you have been interested and informed by these analyses, which is why we produce them. This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work, hoping to talk with you again next week.
And of course, always shout out and respect to Professor Richard Wolff, a legend, even if I disagree with him at times, because I do think he's a little bit of a revisionist Marxist at times. But I mean, the guy is still one of the best academics we have. I think he still does fantastic work, even though I do think he veers into like left anti-communism at times, but that's beside the point. I also forgot. Hold on, let me pull it up. For some reason, I must have deleted it or something. I don't know. But I kept mentioning I was going to bring up Uganda, and I for some reason forgot. It wasn't on the docket for some reason, even though I swore I put it on the docket. What happened is that Bobi Wine, who's the opposition leader against Museveni, who's been a long time dictator and sort of puppet leader for U.S. interests in Uganda, but he's been facing his stiffest competition for some time here with Bobi Wine and a sort of socialist party in opposition against him. And Bobi Wine has definitely dressed himself up in a very communist aesthetic and a very Thomas Sankara aesthetic as well. And a lot of us on the left and the West and just overall in the world, I mean, the global South as well, we saw solidarity with the movement against Museveni in Uganda. We saw solidarity with Bobi Wine as the leader of that movement because he was saying a lot of the right things, and he was clearly a target of their oppression. Now, if you remember weeks ago, I forget when I talked about this, about how the U.S. diplomat in Uganda was actually trying to visit Bobi Wine and was not allowed to by Museveni, right? I didn't know what to chalk that up to directly, to be quite honest. I don't know if that was a good sign or if that was a sign of attempted co-option by the U.S. government of Bobi Wine, who is clearly going to be the next guy to lead Uganda in the next few years. And it seems like that U.S. diplomat did eventually meet with Bobi Wine because clearly they have made some sort of deal. Bobi Wine had a Zoom meeting with, I talked about earlier, the puppet coup attempter, Juan Guaido, saying that he's the president of Venezuela and synergies of defensive democratic principles and human rights across the globe, blah, blah, blah. Again, clearly, like there's no other way to put it. Like Bobi Wine has been co-opted by the U.S. government in some fashion. I don't want to say that because he and the people of Uganda are still facing massive persecution by Museveni and the state there. But it does clearly seem at this point in time, this is the smoking gun in some fashion, that the U.S. government has decided Bobi Wine will be the successor to Museveni, and we will support him. But you have to support our leaders around the world when we want to overthrow governments. That's what we see here, and it's a gross co-option of the Ugandan liberation movement. It's just so sad, man. I don't know how. Honestly, like this really like made me depressed all day. I really didn't want to talk about it because we all saw here. Like I talked about like every time we had a show, I talked about Uganda for a reason. I felt like it was extremely important. I felt like Bobi Wine represented something that was extremely important, and just throwing that away for whatever promises the U.S. State Department gave him. Sad, man. It's really, really sad. But let's move off of that. Back to the fun topics. So Jordan Peterson's back, guys, and like back like a lot. If you haven't paid attention, his YouTube channel is like putting out content like every day, a lot of content. Podcast is back up. Has a new book, all this stuff. Jordan Peterson's back, guys. And for those that have known me for any period of time, you guys know that I've always been a fan, air quotes, of Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson because they are some of the most hilarious individuals in the IDW, of course, and just overall the right-wing media ecosystem. They are perhaps like the most entertaining people in that sphere just because of the wild and stupid shit they say. Now, we're not going to play this whole thing because it's 2 hours. I'm not doing that. And I watched it all. So I've seen the whole thing. And a lot of it is bullshit. And before I play the clips that I've selected, I forgot how much Jordan Peterson is just like this metaphysical rambling. Like this sort of deluge of talking points that lack complete substance, and combined with like this like obvious hatred for like feminism and Marxism. Combine that with nowadays a like deep depression and like self-loathing, which is very weird to watch. Like it was like this guy was depressed throughout this whole video, and he like cried numerous times. It was odd. Yeah, and then you have Dave Rubin, who's just like look at his face right there, man. Like he's a golden retriever as a human being, right? Like just a dumb person. Jordan Peterson, though, he tries to be smart. But let's play this clip. We're gonna play 2 sections and then move on. I'm not gonna play the whole thing just because, again, it's a lot.
Dave, really? Well, you know, I've been an advocate for people to put their lives together. And of course, my life has fallen apart. And so you might ask yourself, well, are you aware of the irony of that? And the answer to that is, well, absolutely. You know, it's shameful. I feel that frequently. And then so you might say, and people tweet this out fairly regularly, you know, who am I to give advice? And I suppose that's a perfectly relevant question. I guess I've always thought, and I said this too in the lectures during the tour, that I don't really think that what I'm doing is giving advice, or if I am, I'm also giving it to me. You know, it's not like I believe that I have all the answers. I have answers that I've found useful while attempting to move ahead. And with this new book, I can show you this. That's what it looks like. The black counterpart to the white book, the previous book.
Out today.
You know, I wrote a lot of it while I was extremely ill. And there were some advantages to that, I think, in that I only kept...
With this like unknown, unnamed disease that had him thinking like days were weeks and sound was too painful. What? I'm sorry.
That material that I felt was reliable under duress. Now, I think perhaps my creativity was somewhat compromised, and so that may have impacted the book negatively, but it made for more severe editing. For example, the last chapter is be grateful in spite of your suffering. And certainly maintaining that gratitude is something I've struggled with. I think anybody who's in pain chronically struggles with resentment, but I know that resentment poisons. And I think that form of courage. And so I stand by what I've written.
You know, it's funny. I would hear some version of that. Oh, you know, people would ask me when they would ask about you, and they would say, "Oh, well, he was telling people to get their lives together, and here, look what happened to him." And my answer was always the same with people, which is, well, first off, he never professed to be Jesus. He never professed to be perfect. You actually, and this is one of the things that I think really helped me throughout the tour. you would often address if you were struggling with something. You know, you, from what I saw, virtually every night gave a different lecture every night. And if you were frustrated by something on a given day,
it's so good. It's so good. You're not Jesus, man. Like, you never said you were Jesus. So like, your entire like self-help guru bullshit brand that you've created and how it's all bullshit. Yeah, that's fine, because you never said you were Jesus Christ. Come on, man. You never said you're the Son of God. So good, man. It's just fantastic content right there. Let's get to the other section. Let me try to remember exactly where it's at. I believe it was at the 1 hour 16 minute and 30-second mark. I believe it's where it's at. Go a little bit before it though, just in case.
Car accident, you're going to be in pain regardless of your state of moral readiness, let's say.
Right. Chapter 6, abandon ideology. I think we could all use a little bit of this right now.
Well, that chapter is really an injunction.
By the way, this is the only part where he really talks about Marxism. And that's what I was actually disappointed. This whole interview is really boring, to be quite honest. This is the only parts that were kind of entertaining to me. Other than like him crying, because he cries later on in the interview, like a lot. That was entertaining. I will admit that. But for a guy that got a lot of his shtick on hating trans people, hating feminism, hating Marxism, that really didn't come up that much. It was a lot of self-help bullshit about how to deal with order and chaos, and it's bullshit. It's not material. It's not substantive. It's self-help bullshit you've heard 1,000 times. Like, let's just be honest about it. Like, there's no difference between what he is saying in large aspects from like the Tony Robbins of the world, right? Except for the moments he does talk about Marxism and feminism and trans people, because then at least he's wildly like crazy and like takes on like this evil like Kermit the Frog character when he's talking about it. Otherwise, again, it's just self-help stuff that is not interesting in the slightest to me.
To allow yourself to think in more complex terms, it's useful to reduce a complex phenomena to its simpler elements, but it's not useful to reduce it to the point of absurdity. And so you can explain hierarchical function using power. You can explain human dynamics using sex. Freud did that. Marx did it with economics, let's say. You can boil down human motivation to a single dimension, and then you can make a compelling story about why that's everything. But it isn't everything. Most things are multivariate, and a good example of that is the wage gap.
By the way, Marx definitely talked about it being a multi-layered issue when it comes to state control, when it comes to economic control, and when you compare different modes of production, you know, like the feudalist mode of production compared to the capitalist mode of production. But digressing, like it, I love how like his whole shtick right now is, oh, when you break things down to its simplest form, it's then absurd, is basically what he's saying. And then he tried to do that with Marx. Again, the irony of it all, just fantastic.
Gap between men and women. There's lots of reasons for that. Many, not one. And it's much more.
Look how angry he is, right? Like, it's not just one. It's not just sexism. It's not just the patriarchy. No. It's not. Patriarchy is good, actually, by the way.
Satisfying in some sense if it's one. Yeah. Partly because then you can identify the enemy and you can not be the enemy, and then you can be good. And so oversimplification is satisfying. You often don't have to test out your theories in the real world to see if they work, and it can give you an unearned sense of moral superiority. And so that's what that chapter is about. It's like
scientific tests are usually about like restricting as many variables as possible, right? Even though like you're talking about social sciences instead, right? Like you're kind of interchanging that. But you kind of do the same thing as social science. If you're conducting experiments, you want to restrict as many variables as possible and isolate exactly what you're testing. So again, this Jordan Peterson's an idiot. Like I said, that's all we're gonna watch because it's actually not that entertaining. I was actually really shocked by it. I ate a ton of edibles and I watched it, and it kind of like ruined my high because it wasn't as entertaining as I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be more batshit. They never talked about Trump really. They never talk about Joe Biden. They don't talk about the election. They don't talk about anything that has some sort of material like reality. It's all metaphysical self-help bullshit for 99% of this interview. And that stuff has never been entertaining or intriguing to me when it comes to critiquing or reacting to, unfortunately. Kind of a buzzkill. But let's try to pick that up with Dinesh D'Souza talking about what is identity socialism. I don't know what it is either. I've never heard this term before in my life. So I'm really excited. I've done a lot of reading when it comes to leftist ideology. I've never heard of the term identity socialism. Very curious where this is going to go from the great Dinesh D'Souza.
There's a new socialism in town.
Yes.
I call it identity socialism.
Oh, he just calls it
The
that.
old socialism, the kind Karl Marx dreamed up, was all about the working class, the sort of blue-collar worker who, ironically, voted for President Trump. But today's socialists couldn't care.
But they didn't. Like what is like what's his how does he decide that like blue collar workers voted for Trump but not Biden or not Bernie or not anyone else? Like what? Is it college education? Is that what it's based? That's what he's basing it off of? I'm trying to guess what it is. Because Trump didn't win the election, dude. And he didn't get the popular vote either time. So I don't know what you're talking about here. I'm saying like the around 80 million plus people that voted either for Clinton or for Joe Biden were purely the ruling class and the bourgeoisie. I mean, I would have to see some evidence to that. But interesting how he kind of correctly says that Karl Marx was about protecting the working class, and then tries to say that Trump was a Marxist on the low. Like, come on, man, Dinesh.
But today's socialists couldn't care less about the guy in the hard hat. He had his chance at revolution and blew it. Today's socialist is all about race, gender, and transgender rights.
What?
Classes.
Guys, I mean, we talk about on this show, I want to say every single episode about like how does the left win? Rebuild the labor movement. That is the number one thing. Rebuild unions. Rebuild the labor movement. Those are the number one issues or solutions to rebuilding the left power in America or any country. Like what? It's the conflation of liberals and left, isn't it? Like, in Dinesh D'Souza's mind, Joe Biden's a socialist, and like Hillary Clinton's a socialist, and Neera Tanden's a socialist. Like, that's what Dinesh D'Souza thinks, right? Because you talk to any socialist, the first thing they talk about is the labor movement and trying to regalvanize that, rebuild it in some fashion. God damn it, Dinesh. God damn it. Dude, we're less than 30 seconds in. I've stopped at least 2 times. So bad.
Is an afterthought. To understand this is to understand the left's takeover of the college campus and all the ills that takeover has spawned, from Me Too to Black Lives Matter to girls competing against biological boys. But
first, I'm not going to step into the last one because it's stupid. But Me Too and Black Lives Matter are liberal movements. Like, explicitly so. And like socialists have not taken over college campuses. Like the Cornel West is going through his issue with Harvard right now, and you're saying, and Cornel West is not even like a real socialist in a lot of people's minds. Okay. And he's facing issues with his tenure at Harvard. Like, what are we talking about here, man? Like, the left has never been taking over college campuses. It's never happened.
Campus culture has now metastasized into the culture of the whole society. As liberal writer Andrew Sullivan has put it, we all live on campus.
Andrew Sullivan, the liberal writer, yes.
Now, identity socialism is first and foremost about division, not just class division, but now race division, gender division, transgender division. Blacks and Latinos are in, whites are out, women are in, men are out. Gays, bisexuals, transsexuals, transgenders are in, heterosexuals
True.
are out.
This is accurate.
Illegals are in, native-born citizens are out.
Absolutely.
One may think this is all part of the
or instead forcing immigration from the native-born away from America and just letting anyone in. That's what's happening right now. Yes. Yes. What? Like... I always forget this before we watch PragerU videos about how like it's just nonstop bullshit. It's just a nonstop word vomit that means nothing. It's all lies, and you really have to like sit here and say like everything's wrong. Like everything you're saying is wrong not to a degree. I mean, it is. Because intersectionality is kind of what he's talking about, right? The idea that understanding oppression and exploitation, it's not just along class lines, along race lines, gender lines, and stuff like that. That's been overall leftist understanding for quite some time. And there's some debate about that and prioritization of certain issues and antagonisms within society and how you work for liberation. But intersectionality is not about sowing division. It's actually about bringing these different forms of oppression, exploitation into one commonality to fight against. Right? Because when you fight against capitalism, you have to also fight against the patriarchy. You have to also fight against racism, both socially, culturally, and institutionally. To do one without the other would defeat the overall purpose and overall fight to some degree. Because if you defeat capitalism, but patriarchy exists, then the creation of property is not that far. We've seen in history. That's how property became a thing, was through the man having dominion over the household and, in a sense, monogamous marriage. If you don't know about that, I recommend reading Frederick Engels' The Origin of the Family, Private Property in the State. Really fascinating read. But that's not division. So like that's why it's just not true. But yes, we want illegals in and we want the native-borns out.
You may think this is all part of the politics of inclusion, but to think that is to get only half the picture. The point for the left is not merely to include, but also to exclude. So where did this identity socialism come from? Meet Herbert Marcuse. Born in Berlin in 1898, Marcuse fled Germany at the dawn of the Nazi era. After stints at Columbia, Harvard, and Brandeis, Marcuse moved to California, where he joined the University of California at San Diego in 1965. You'd think that living in a paradise like Southern California, with all the comforts and privileges of academic life, might have softened Marcuse's Marx-like hatred of capitalism. But it was not to be. If anything, the more he prospered, the more he wanted to bring the system down.
Did I hear this correctly, that this guy fled Nazi Germany? Hold on. I gotta rewind that. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. I gotta make sure I heard that right. Because I don't really know this person. I haven't heard this name before.
Born in Berlin in 1898, Marcuse fled Germany at the dawn of the Nazi era.
Oh,
After
the Dinesh D'Souza has an issue with a refugee. Shocker. And he hating a refugee from Nazism. Wow, another big shocker there.
stints
So
at
good.
Columbia,
So
Harvard,
good.
and Brandeis, Marcuse moved to California, where he joined the University of California at San Diego in 1965. You'd think that living in a paradise
Oh,
like
I've seen
Southern
pictures of this guy before.
California, with all the comforts and privileges of academic life, might have softened
Oh, he's a Frankfurt school guy. Oh my God. Of course. It's all about critical race theory and critical theory. Oh my God. So
Marcuse's Marx-like hatred of capitalism. But it was not to be. If anything, the more he prospered, the more he wanted to bring the system down. He had a problem, however, a big one. Socialism didn't work in America. Life was too good. The working class in the US didn't aspire to overthrow the existing order. They aspired to own a home. How could you foment revolution without revolutionaries?
Marcuse lived from 1898 to 1979. So he inspired and was a part of and experienced the revolutionary radical era of the 60s, the late 50s, and the early 70s. I mean, he witnessed people like MLK, Malcolm X, and Fred Hampton get assassinated by the U.S. government. He saw things like the Kent State shooting by the state National Guard. So what are you talking about here, man? Like, he lived and experienced one of the most extreme revolutionary periods of U.S. history. And he came into the U.S. at the heels of another revolutionary period in the Great Depression, when we had two socialist parties, a communist party, the CIO, force FDR into a New Deal economics that he experienced in Germany. So this painting of America is just such a lie. It is.
Classic Marxism had no answer for this.
No,
but
we
almost
do.
100 years after Marx, Marcuse did. The answer was college students. They would be the recruits for what he termed the Great Refusal, the repudiation and overthrow of free market capitalism. Conditions were perfect. The students of the 60s were already living in what was in effect a socialist commune, a university campus. Rather than
University campuses are not like socialist communes. As someone that has been in a university before, is not like a socialist commune at all.
being grateful to their parents for providing them with this opportunity to learn and study, they were restless and bored. Most importantly, they were looking for meaning, a form of self-fulfillment that went beyond material gratification. Of course, as with all successful social movements, timing was critical. Here, Marcuse was very fortunate. The 60s was the decade of the Vietnam War. Students faced the prospect of being drafted. Thus, they had selfish reasons to oppose the conflict. Marcuse and his acolytes.
Dude, Dinesh, we killed 3 million Vietnamese people. At least. We killed, I think it was like 2 million people in Laos. Like, what are you talking about? It was selfish for people not to want to go bomb poor people across the world to stop communism. Like really? Like, what?
Turned this selfishness into righteousness by teaching the students that they weren't draft dodgers, they were noble resistors who were part of a global struggle for social justice. Marcuse portrayed Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Cong as a kind of third world proletariat.
They are
fighting to free themselves from American imperialism.
Yes, they
This
were.
represented a transposition of Marxist categories. The new working class were the Vietnamese freedom fighters. The evil capitalists were American soldiers serving on behalf of the American.
No, that's not how Marxists thought at that era. We fully were aware that the working class were being drafted to go fight the working class in Vietnam for the ruling class fight between these two countries. Or I don't say between these two countries. At the behest of the South Vietnamese ruling class, the U.S. ruling class made their working class go fight their war. That's what happened. The U.S. generals, the U.S. government, obviously the corporations, they are the evil capitalists. The poor man, the poor grunt on the ground that got drafted, no. We were fighting for him not to be drafted. Why? Because he is part of the working class. He shares more in solidarity with those North Vietnamese and Viet Cong than with you, Dinesh D'Souza. But he thinks this war was like a good war, apparently. Like, who the fuck thinks the Vietnam War was like a righteous war anymore?
American government. Marcuse found, in addition to the students, other groups ripe for the taking. The first was the Black Power movement, which was a militant adjunct to the civil rights movement. The beauty of this group, from Marcuse's point of view, was that unlike white students, its members wouldn't have to be instructed in the art of grievance. Blacks had grievances that dated back centuries. Through another Marxist transposition, blacks would become the working class, whites the capitalist class.
Dinesh, what racial group enslaved the other to make them a free labor force for hundreds of years? And then when that group was freed, they were not given any economic restitution, reparations. They were not given anything to support themselves. And in large sections, they were actually forced back into quasi-slavery in the South. What are you talking about? Which group was subject to Jim Crow? Remind me, Dinesh. Which group is often used as a cheaper labor force, as evident by the wage gap?
Based on this analysis, took the place of class. Another emerging source of disgruntlement was the feminists. Marcuse recognized they too could be taught to see themselves as an oppressed class. This, of course, would require a further Marx.
By the way, feminists did not need to be taught in the 1960s that they were an oppressed class. They were fully aware of that. And still are. Especially from a man. They don't need to hear that. They know. And there's a long, long history of feminism that predates Marcuse in the Marxist tradition and the anarchist tradition as well.
Marxist transposition, women would now be viewed as the working class and men the capitalist class. The class category.
What group exploits the other for their labor? Like, what group profits off the other, both historically and contemporary? Like, these are simple questions that anyone should be able to ask when they hear this bullshit. It's like, well, what group has been the exploited group? What group has been forced to be the working class of the capitalists? It's often been women. Look at factories in the turn of the century. Or the Industrial Revolution, even before that. It's women and children.
Would now be shifted to gender. Marcuse recognized that educating and mobilizing all these groups,
and by the way, these aren't being shifted to these things. They're in addition to it. These class antagonisms, as a result of economic inequality and separation, plays into racism, plays into sexism. Okay. And you can actually probably say the reverse with sexism, that the patriarchy existed before capitalism, of course. So which one was the chicken, which one was the egg? You know, it's up to you, I think, to decide to some degree in terms of economic exploitation, because economic exploitation, the commodity production, obviously existed before capitalism as well. But digressing. Let's just get through this.
Bored students, the aggrieved blacks, and the angry feminists would take time. But he wasn't in a hurry. Soon enough, the radical students would be the radical professors, teaching identity socialism to a fresh crop of impressionable recruits. Over time, Marcuse believed the university could produce a new type of culture, and that culture would then spill into the larger society to infect primary education, the news media, and entertainment. Even big business, the hated capitalist class itself, would succumb. He was right.
No.
Identity socialism has arrived.
None of this is true.
I'm Dinesh D'Souza for Prager
None of that was
University.
true.
This video was made
Oh my God, that was rough, man. Holy shit. Wow. All right, we're going to play. I'm going to read this. I should read it. And then we're going to play one more clip and then get out of here. For those that know me to some degree, know that I've always really highly respected and highly appreciated David Graeber and his work. Rest in peace. He passed away last year, and he's one of the first like academics to radicalize me in a sense. So I feel like I owe a lot of my personal journey to David Graeber's work, his insights, just him as a person too. And he wrote an essay before he passed away, apparently, and it's been published now by Jacobin, and it's his last work. And I thought it's a short essay; it's only about a few paragraphs long. I thought I'd read it in honor of him, you know, in reverence to him. I mean, he's one of the great modern anarchists of our day. Like that just is. So let's read it. David Graeber, after the pandemic, we can't go back to sleep. In an essay penned shortly after his death, David Graeber argued that post-pandemic, we can't slip back into reality where the way our society is organized to serve every whim of a small handful of rich people while debasing and degrading the vast majority of us is seen as sensible or reasonable. Hold on. Someone texted me. Excuse me. Before he tragically died of the untimely age of 51 in September 2020, the anarchist, anthropologist, and organizer David Graeber wrote this essay on what life and politics could look like after the COVID pandemic. Jacobin is proud to publish Graeber's essay for the first time. At some point in the next few months, the crisis will be declared over. We'll be able to return. Let me zoom in for you guys. My bad. At some point in the next few months, this crisis will be declared over. We'll be able to return to our non-essential jobs. For many, this would be like waking from a dream. The media and political classes will definitely encourage us to think of it this way. This is what happened after the 2008 financial crash. There was a brief moment of questioning. What is finance anyway? Isn't it just other people's debts? What is money? Is it just debt too? What's debt? Isn't just a promise? If money and debt are just a collection of promises we make to each other, then couldn't we just as easily make different ones? The window was almost instantly shut by those insisting we shut up, stop thinking, and get back to work, or at least start looking for it. Last time, most of us fell for it. This time, it is critical that we do not. Because in reality, the crisis we just experienced was waking from a dream, a confrontation with the actual reality of human life, which is that we are a collection of fragile beings taking care of one another. That those who do the lion's share of this care work that keeps us alive are overtaxed, underpaid, and daily humiliated. And that very large proportion of the population don't do anything at all but spin fantasies, extract rents, and generally get in the way of those who are making, fixing, moving, and transporting things or tending to the needs of other living beings. It is imperative that we not slip back into reality where all this makes some sort of inexplicable sense, the way senseless things so often do in dreams. How about this? Why don't we stop treating it as entirely normal, that the more obviously one's work benefits others, the less is likely to be paid for it, or insisting that financial markets are the best way to direct long-term investment, even as they are propelling us to destroy most life on Earth? Why not instead, once the current emergency is declared over, actually remember what we've learned? That if the economy means anything, it is the way we provide each other with what we need to be alive in every sense of the term. That what we call the market is largely just a way of tabulating the aggregate desires of rich people, most of whom are at least slightly pathological, and the most powerful of whom were already completing the designs for the bunkers they had planned to escape to if we continue to be foolish enough to believe their minions' lectures that we were all collectively too lacking in basic common sense to do anything about oncoming catastrophes. This time around, can we please just ignore them? Most of the work we're currently doing is dream work. It exists only for its own sake, or to make rich people feel good about themselves, or to make poor people feel bad about themselves. And if we simply stopped, it might be possible to make ourselves a much more reasonable set of promises. For instance, to create an economy that lets us actually take care of the people who are taking care of us. Rest in peace to David Graeber. He will be missed. Shit really bums me out. I wish I had more time to do the show. I would play his lecture on debt. I'm probably going to do that on the next show, just FYI. Because that's an amazing lecture. If you haven't listened to it yet, either do it or wait till I do it and join me here on the show and we listen to him together. But last clip I'm going to play from the great Walter Rodney, who has a new book coming out, by the way, a new collection of essays. I highly recommend. I think it's on colonialism and Marxism. But here's him talking about articulating how crisis at the center of capital, due to inherent contradictions within the system, is thus exported to the third world in an attempt to save itself in a globalized system of unevenness and exploitation.
Import the inflated products and in that sense accept the inflation from the central capitalist countries, which of course is not new, because in previous depressions central capitalism has also sought to export the depression, to export the penury, to export the pressure created by contradictions internal to the system in Europe itself. A system which believes in the private appropriation of the products of labor, although whether it likes it or not, it has become more and more socialized as the days go by. So the international capitalist system has never been more socialized than it is today. Social forces all over the world enter into the making of the products which are sent out by capitalism. And yet it has never been more private in its appropriation. Never has so much wealth been concentrated in so few hands in a system that has been globalized in its social content. And these contradictions emerge, first of all, in the center where capital resides, where capital concentrates, and they are then exported to the rest of the third world, to the rest of the world. We only need to look at the principal indices of the crisis. 1, the rate of inflation. 2, the degree of unemployment. And 3, the instability of major international currencies. And you see how in each of these instances, the crisis, however great it may be, in Britain or in Germany or in the United States is far less than the extent of the crisis in Africa and the Caribbean. That's for sure. And the central capitalist countries have some mechanisms for dealing with the problem. They establish priorities, they pass legislation, they take steps to try and cope with the three problems I've mentioned. Whereas,
ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening and watching this show. I'll be back on next week sometime. Quick reminder, Mixed Combat Radio will be back on Sunday. I will be on the Southpaw podcast on Patreon on Monday, talking about scandals in the boxing industry throughout history. And this will be, I'll be back on either next week, late next week, or early the following week. Everyone have a fantastic day, evening, night, wherever you are in the world. And remember, at all times, fuck the police. Free Palestine. Okay? Then you guys know how to support the show. Have a good day, good night, good evening. Bye.